Hello, everyone. So we'll just wait another minute or so for everybody to join. Thanks for coming to the webinar today. We'll get started in another minute or two. Okay, great. So I see a number of you joining. So I think I will just kick off quickly as we are right at 12 o'clock here, and others will join us in the meantime, not to delay any further for those that are on time. So welcome everyone to this webinar today. My name is Stephanie Raymond and I'm the Association Manager of Chapter Zero Brussels, and I will be your host for the webinar today. So Chapter Zero Brussels, like our chapters in other countries, are existing to provide tools, resources, and advice to guide the transition to net zero, putting specific emphasis on the role that the board of directors will play in this transition. So we are a network of board members that exist in now 24 countries around the world. So welcome to many of our members here in Chapter Zero Brussels, and also to members from other chapters as well. So the webinar today is going to focus on the scope and the status of the EU Green Deal. And we're also going to take a zoom on the financing available in Europe in particular to guide the transition. And we are really happy to organize this webinar together with Schumann Associates. So Schumann Associates is a leading business advisory firm in Brussels with 30 years experience in European funding and public affairs. Schumann is specialized in EU funding and financing and has an outstanding track record of winning both national and Brussels-led funding instruments for their clients. So a big thanks to their support today. And as speakers, we have with us today Mercedes, who is a board member of Chapter Zero Brussels, as well as Anka, Head of Investment Financing from Schumann Associates. Mercedes sits on the board of Chapter Zero Brussels and has a background working with EU institutions, notably on how policy developments are impacting business strategies of European clients. She was partner and head at a professional service firm leading the EU office and is now active in consultancy and sustainability strategies, as well as sitting on boards. Anka is the head of investment financing at Schumann and has a background of more than 15 years of winning funding for clients' investment plans with a focus on manufacturing, decarbonization, and sustainability investments. So a big thank you to you both for being with us today. I'm looking forward to all the insights you have to share. Oops, not too far. So a quick look at the agenda that we will focus on. So we'll spend a few minutes, which we've just done, to introduce the topic. Then next we will have Mercedes give us an overview of the scope and the status of the EU Green Deal. Then we'll hand over to Anka for a look at the financing, and we will dedicate a good portion of the webinar as well to answering your questions at the end. For that, please use the Q&A function that you have in the webinar, and we'll try to get to as many of your questions as possible. So Mercedes, over to you to kick us off.
Thank you. I think I have the control of the screen, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you all. Thank you, Anka, for being today with me on this nice event. I'm happy to be here to take you on a Green Deal journey that I know that most of you have heard about the EU Green Deal, or they know it very well. In any case, let's go today in the following slide to see what it contains, what are the dramatic changes that this journey on the net zero future is going to take. And I would say that the journey is paved on good intentions. So let's see what all these intentions are. You know that the European Commission is a strong policy maker and acts as a regulator, and for tackling the issue of climate change and the emissions of CO2, they decided to go strong on the policy response. So this is what we are going to see. A strong policy response versus, you would tell me about what is the market signals that are coming out. So let's go and see how the policy and the market might be interacting one with the other. My slides are not passing. Maybe Stephanie, they are still with you? Okay, thank you. So as I said, message taken by the European Commission regarding the discussions, the international discussion, the Treaty of Paris, the IPPC discussions, and the way the European Commission put it back is to set up targets. So targets which are set in climate law, not only at the European level, but definitively within the legislative system of the different member states. And this happened 2 years ago in 2021. So message taken, but back already in 2019, when the EU Green Deal was put on the picture by Mrs. von der Leyen, just recently appointed, they call it the man on the moon moment. Why? Because a big package of policy was in preparation. It was called Fit for 55. So in the title, it was embedding the targets of reducing CO2 emissions by 55% by 2030. So meaning in the next years to come, basically tomorrow. At the same time, the ambition of becoming the net neutral continent was also set by 2050. And this also provoke a sort of cascade of all regions in the world just following this as well. Again, it was the tool used is policy at the service of climate targets with a quite holistic type of approach, new for the EU, reaching out topics on biodiversity, circularity, topics that they were not strictly speaking that strong in the previous role of the European Commission. Something dramatic happened during COVID times is the capacity of the EU to borrow and to have access to finance, much bigger access and capacity to finance that Anka will explain in details later on how this capacity has been translated. And the capacity of the EU to be leading on standards, GDPR, etc. So today, there is a lot of legislation which has been voted. We are going to see that in a minute. There is a wide scope of sectors which have been covered, including the industrial package. The bet today by the EU is on hydrogen, on renewable, on energy security, on green investments, and continue supporting and leading in everything which is the sustainable finance and the standards of the sustainability standards push. We see as well that the journey paved of good intention also has to face some resistance. The reliance on the member states for making things happening at their own level. So at the macro EU level, it still needs to be within the national members' reach, and a framework for decarbonize or subsidize. Stephanie, next one, if you don't mind. I think my control is not that total, as you can see. As I said, ambition has been set in law, and this ambition is growing. So you see in this graph that the topics which are reached out by the Commission are well beyond business. They are about protecting nature, they're about agriculture, they're about pollution, they're also about transition. So policy is an instrument that also covers and takes care about the vulnerable, well beyond what maybe the market can or should do as well. So this ambition is there and is growing, and not only because of what you see on the picture, but what we are going to hear in a minute regarding the new developments. Next one. We mentioned earlier on legislation. When we talk about policy, we cannot escape legislation. So this is a limited glance of all the legislation that has been put on the table. I did check this morning, and on the site of the European Parliament, I found out that there have been 148 initiatives under the EU Green Deal package, of which 35 are arrived and 13 are about to be expected, 61 departed and departures, so at the very beginning, and 33 departed, 2 on hold on. So that means that the delivery capacity of the EU is there, and the capacity to initiate and to make the scope and the ambition to change is still totally intact. So I mentioned some of them. We can go in the discussion to some of these initiatives and to some of the legislation which has been putting it. But what I want to tell you now on this slide is the following. It's not the quantity that is important. It's also the impact, the reach, and the concentration on time of all this legislation. So it has been, by those who have been around in Brussels for a long time, a quite fast policy-making cycle, probably unknown to me. I mean, everything has been concentrated in a year and a half, and legislation as sensitive as carbon tax has taken no more than a year and a half, when we know that the legislation, for instance, on due diligence has been handing over, now it's being accelerated. So the speed is very fast. There is new instruments, we are revising some, we reply to an holistic approach, is also reactive and proactive. So there is a push and pull, takes care about the social. And I think we can synthesize that the response of the EU is a mix of policy, subsidy, state aid, and finance, and policy has quite a strong role to play. We might go to the next one. As I announced, the EU Green Deal came out in 2019, was sort of incomplete without this industrial plan dimension. And this came out only a few days ago. Probably it was accelerated, so I've been talking about being fast, but probably on the industrial side, it has been a little bit more difficult to put all the member states on the same line, and still is. And IRA, so the upcoming legislation in the US to do the same, which is enhancing the competitiveness of the economies to respond to the challenge of the climate change and moving to net zero industrial base, has made the European Commission coming out with the Green Deal Industrial Plan now in March 2023, which is again a set of few policy initiatives that I'm going to develop in a minute. But let me say as well that the Green Deal Industrial Plan is there to leverage and incentivize the new technology key for the transitioning of the industrial sector to net zero. The photovoltaic, the wind turbines, the carbon capture, the hydrogen, and I have to say that in this plan, we're talking about setting up an hydrogen bank. So all the technologies of tomorrow, the batteries, obviously, but all these, since we keep on talking on policy, cannot have a certain chance to work for businesses if it doesn't fit into a regulatory predictable framework. And this is where, again, the Net Zero Industrial Act wants to operate, about setting targets and about tackling a very sensitive issue, which has been how we can speed up access funding, the funding that EU and member states are putting at disposal, and what all the investors have been heavily criticizing the European Commission for, which has been the lengthy process of getting permits for major green investments to accelerate the green transition. So this Net Zero Industrial Act is meant to be responding to that, with maybe a caveat that will come into the discussion to see to which extent the member states will really play the game and go into that direction. Another aspect of this predictable regulatory framework is access to the raw materials. There is no future on future technologies, clean future technologies, if you don't have access to probably certain minerals and certain materials that will enable you just to respond to the challenge. Unfortunately, Europe doesn't have those raw materials. So we probably realize a little bit late, if I can say it like this. But we are depending on countries such as Brazil, China, and Vietnam. And those three countries together do have access to all those critical raw materials, rare earth, and etc., that they are necessary for the technology just to evolve and to respond to the challenges. We have to say that in any perspective of growth, access to energy is going to be critical, and access to a cheap and affordable energy is critical for business and for the citizen. So the reform of the electric market design prompted and probably accelerated, certainly accelerated by the Ukraine war, is the response to enable renewables to flourish and to be favored by all the policy instruments that the EU has been putting and is putting on the REPower package. The second pillar is access to funding. I'm not going to go into the details on state aid, so I don't know if there is lawyers in the call, but during COVID, to enable the situation and the competitiveness framework in which we were evolving with a highly disrupted value chain, supply chain, the stated rules were waived during that period, just to enable a major competitiveness of the European industry. This will probably being seen to be exempted again during these phases in which the Net Zero Industrial Act will evolve. And that create maybe a distorting situation in which big countries will have access to support more their own champions than smaller countries. So to be seen how this is going to be turning out. Access to funding is not only the funding that the EU would put on the table, it's also about enabling more private funding to come into it. We mentioned about the IPCEs, so Anka might mention that further, but there are all these strategic projects getting new funding and mix funding with private to respond to the strategic framework infrastructure needed for some technologies and some big projects to happen, wind farms to very large levels. The simplification of the procedures to get the clearance will be critical for the strategic projects just to deliver. So this is going to be back again. And one way not to respond on an ad hoc approach, but on a structural approach is not within the Net Zero Industrial Pact, is mentioned, the setting up, once it will be possible, of the European Sovereignty Fund. So in the near future, as Mrs. von der Leyen has been announcing. All these kind of go without skills. So there is quite a target on skills and reskilling of capacity. You will need new type of capacity, and you will need to take care of the capacity of the skills which are no longer valid to reorganize them to the new challenge of this net zero economy. And trade. Despite the fact that some of these measures might prompt some of the observers to say that we are going to a more protectionism type of approach. Here we are seeing that they are promoting further the free trade agreements and to go more into net zero industrial partnerships. So maybe I'll go to my almost net slide, and I'm happy to be more or less on time. I tried to summarize this situation, how business might look at EU Green Deal. It's not only about policy and business, because they are being friends or foes, and maybe friends and foes would have been a nice title for this slide. I will take a step back, and I will say that the context and the nature of the issue that we have is not in comparison with the 2009 financial crisis that eventually was resolved with mechanism, with market solutions, and with some interventions from the welfare state. I think the nature of this of the journey of decarbonization, it's prompting and putting on emphasis the fact that business as usual is over. There is maybe a resistance to acknowledge this, or to think that market mechanism might respond to this. we are putting in another order of priorities what matter for business. And surprisingly, we have to acknowledge and to be modest enough to acknowledge that science is the factor which is going to make us understanding that tomorrow stranded assets will be coming out if we don't take this turn. And it's not even a turn, because it's quite a systematic transformation that business needs to go for it. And policy is just enabling this change and this journey to be walked, to be engaged, and to be helped, because the whole situation is about accompanying business. And business usually are quite well prepared in assessing the risk, in assessing the policy risk, in anticipating those. Maybe again, the nature of the risks that are at stake and the complexity and adding up of many elements make it quite complex. The push for clean technology has been there under an innovation and cutting edge and being the early in the market. We see it coming more. It's not going to be the only response, but it's going to be a big part of the response that is coming out with the access to finance. And I'm not going to add up more on the question of people and skills and talents. I think those of you who are in business, you know how critical this element is. And my very, very last slide, which is maybe to prompt you for the questions later on. I just read them. So protectionism, the role of state aid, are we in a race to subsidies? What is the focus of industry, which is more carbon emitter than other sectors? Are we talking about an ad hoc response or a structural response? And I think we have seen with a policy response, the approach seems to be more structural, and maybe ad hoc responses are more subject to political opportunism and etc. Are we in a race with stick and carrots? Probably the mix of both are there. All this could have a chance to happen if we give the business the opportunities just to give access to financing their transition, to deeply finance their transformation. And with this, I am happy to hand over to Anka on the second part of this presentation.
Mercedes, maybe before we get into the financing, there was one question which I think might be helpful to look at your slides before we move on. The first question in the chat from Laurent was if you could explain where the EU taxonomy fits in this structure, actually, and then we'll hand over to Anka and we'll take the rest of the questions during the Q&A.
This is an excellent question, because technically speaking, when we talk about EU Green Deal, well, the discussion on sustainable finance were not there. Sustainable finance questions came out earlier because they were a direct consequence of the Treaty of Paris, the TCFD initiative, in which the European Commission was the first one just to buy in and to take and to develop what later on became the EU taxonomy to define where, how to qualify those green investments are. In fact, it's not within what we call Green Deal, but is one of the key elements of the Green Deal, because it's through investments that the business can engage on this journey. The investments know in a level playing field, we all have the same understanding of what is a green investment. And this is the objective of the EU Green Taxonomy. And what is totally within the remit of the Green Deal, in fact, I put everything over there, is also all the part regarding the climate reporting, the establishment of the international sustainability standard reporting, which the European Commission has been taking the leading role in promoting the European standards. And interestingly, we are seeing a quite close alignment from the international and European. So sustainable finance is a fully support part of the EU Green Deal. However, when we talk about the package of policy, it tends not to be even appearing even in this slide, which was meant to show you the scope and the breadth and the reach of the Green Deal. But the question, I welcome very much this question, because sustainable finance is really underlying and enabling this to happen.
Thanks, Mercedes. Okay, so Anka, over to you for the second part of the presentation.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Mercedes, and good afternoon to everyone attending. So my name is Anka Vizu. I'm head of investment financing at Schumann Associates. We're a Brussels-based consultancy with national and regional presence throughout the EU. What we do, we help clients capture and go for the right funding instruments to support their investment. Over the past few years, we've seen the demand for support for green investments, and the Green Deal has become a key priority for many of our clients. In fact, if I were to look back, I would say that one of the most frequent type of funding our clients were looking for was support for green investment. It would be in the top 3 of the requests that we are getting. And when the Green Deal came out, it was immediately apparent that it will touch on almost all economic sectors. And the pressure it puts on businesses to one hand, make their operations greener and more sustainable, and on the other hand, innovate to build sustainability into their products and services. Or in other words, come out with greener products and services on the market. So you have the 2 core components, you have decarbonization and you have innovation. Now, if we go to the first slide, yes. Because of the wide scope of the Green Deal, which came on top of the complex political system that we have in the EU with 27 governments and with many regional and local governance structures that retain competency over some of the policies and priorities, it was also very apparent that there cannot be only one funding instrument to support all the sectors. So the result was a multitude of instruments, some of them existing instruments that had to be adapted to support the Green Deal priorities, but also new instruments that had to be newly created. So what we have today is a landscape of EU funding instruments that is complex, numerous instruments governed at different levels. It can be a challenge to navigate this complexity, and this is perhaps one of the most frequent feedback that we do get from our clients. However, if you zoom out and you look at the bigger picture, it becomes apparent that the EU funding landscape is meant to target not just one sector, not just one technology, not just one type of actor, but all of them, from early research to piloting to deployment, but also policy formulation and implementation. So the current EU landscape is a comprehensive funding toolbox, let's call it that, governed at different levels, with some instruments managed centrally by the European Commission and others administered at national or regional level. And before we go into the instruments themselves, I want to have a quick look at what was initially planned and how that evolved over time, because while all of the sectors were meant to be impacted by the Green Deal, some of them have gained a more central role in recent years. So let's go to the next slide. Okay. So Mercedes mentioned that the Green Deal came out in 2019, but the Green Deal investment plan came only in January 2020. It proposed investing €1 trillion in sustainable investments over the next decade. It proposed a set of new instruments, such as the Just Transition Mechanism or InvestEU. So that was the initial plan, but then COVID happened. And in May 2020, the EU introduced the Recovery and Resilience Facility as a fund to support the member states' post-pandemic recovery efforts. And it aligned to the Green Deal targets by allocating at least 37% of the funding of the recovery facility to climate and environmental projects. And then the start of the Russian aggression in Ukraine in February 22 prompted a renewed focus on Europe's energy security and resilience. And in response, the EU came out with the REPowerEU initiative, which aims to accelerate the deployment of renewable energy across the continent. And later that year, we had the US Inflation Reduction Act. So as you see, we have a series of additional pressures that keep refining the initial plan. And the Inflation Reduction Act wasn't the only investment support plan. Others exist in other geographies that put pressure on how business in Europe should respond to the ever-changing context. All this pressure translated into the Green Deal investment plan that Mercedes mentioned, that it was released about 1 month ago. The aim is to transition the European industry to a carbon neutral economy by boosting investment in industries and in innovation. And to do so, we had to flexibilize the state aid rules that would help support these plans, which happened in March 2023. So while the initial intent was to support all the sectors of the economy, the events that followed have increased focus on some sectors. Amongst which circular economy, we have mobility, raw materials, clean technologies, and renewable energy, just to mention a few of them. So everyone is impacted, some are particularly targeted. Now let's go to the instruments themselves. Okay, and let's start with the instruments that are available at EU level. A few common features for these four instruments. They are all managed directly by the European Commission, which means there is one set of rules that apply to all applicants, irrespective of their country of origin. In addition, projects are expected to benefit more than just their host country, and this requirement can take different forms. For instance, under Horizon Europe, for most calls of proposals, the projects must be developed in a consortium of at least 3 partners coming from 3 member states. For Connecting Europe facility, which is the instrument that supports infrastructure, the infrastructure support is of European relevance. For all the programs, the projects are required to put in place a dissemination plan to help dissipate the results as widely as possible into Europe. So, and this is part of the application file. Last common feature of all these programs is that the calls for proposals are determined in advance. So it gives applicants predictability. For instance, for Horizon Europe, we have work plans covering 2 years where the scope of the call, the budget, some preliminary funding conditions are already described. And the ones for 2023 and 2024 are freshly out, and we know what calls to expect over the next 2 years. LIFE works with 4-year plans. Innovation Fund launches calls every year. So there is this predictability element that is very important. So to sum up, for the central programs, we have one set of rules for all the countries. We have projects that are expected to benefit more than one country, and we have predictability of calls for projects. Now, let's look at the individual programs, and I'll start with Horizon Europe, which I believe is one of the most widely known. Horizon Europe is the research and innovation program of the European Union. It has 3 pillars. The first one supports individual researchers. The third one supports startups and spin-offs. And the central one, the second pillar, focuses on global challenges and European industrial competitiveness. And it is under this pillar that it supports research into many, many areas, such as renewable energy, circular economy, sustainable transport, climate adaptation, advanced manufacturing, and so on. Now, there are tens of calls for projects that come out each year under Horizon Europe. A significant number of them target companies that want to advance new technologies or adapt business models to new realities. And I'll just give you a few examples of what the possibilities are. For instance, for the batteries value chain, over the next years, Horizon Europe would support research and innovation into battery material recycling, into production and processing of batteries, or into battery to grid integration. And for these projects, they are prepared to give out grants of 5 to 8 million euro per project with a funding rate of 70 to 100%. So the support is considerable. Maybe another example would be opportunities for manufacturing, where research into technologies for circularity in manufacturing, or digital twins, or manufacturing as a service is supported. Again, grants between 5 to 7 million euro, and the funding rate of 70 to 100% of eligible costs. Now, the priorities that we see supported under Horizon Europe are generally aligned with what's on the high-level agenda of the European Union. So if we've seen that in the past few years, the agenda is dominated by topics such as strategic autonomy for batteries, for chips, for clean tech, sustainable mobility and alternative fuels, or modernizing the grid and energy systems, the same topics are reflected in the calls for proposals that we expect in the next 2 years. And because these topics are so wide and so numerous, and the solutions to all the challenges in the sector don't come just from the private sector, for Horizon Europe, the type of applicants that can be supported is very, very wide. So it's not focused only on companies. Almost any legal entity can be eligible to apply. On the other hand, there are instruments that offer a more targeted support for companies. And one of these instruments is the Innovation Fund. So this one is much more focused on companies and projects that have a high potential to decarbonize some key economic sectors, the EU ETS sectors. So we're speaking about steel, we're speaking about cement, we're speaking about glass, ceramics, paper, but also renewable energy technologies and carbon capture, utilization and storage. At the moment, the Innovation Fund is split into two main branches. There is support for large-scale projects, and then there is support for small-scale projects. And investments above 7.5 million euro are considered to be large, while those between 2.5 and 7.5 are considered to be small. What the program does, it offers 60% of CAPEX and OPEX for large-scale projects over a period of 10 years, while for the small scale project, the support is 60% of the CAPEX. And for this project, the carbon abatement promise and the financial and technical maturity of the project proposed are key success factors. So it's very important to come out with a strong, solid project that promises a significant carbon reduction to have a chance to win support. Now, I'll go through the other two instruments, and I'll focus first on Connecting Europe facility. As I said, this is the instrument that supports infrastructure. It aims to make the infrastructure in Europe more sustainable and better connected between the countries. It supports three sectors. One is transport, the other one is energy, and of less focus today for us is the digital one. It supports, what does it fund? It supports studies and works that are needed to build Europe's new network of infrastructure. And this takes the form of energy grids, carbon capture grids, hydrogen or EV charging, just to name a few, and maybe EV charging and hydrogen are of particular relevance today, as we've seen the proposal to have a charging point every 200 kilometers under in Europe's main infrastructure networks approved just today. So funding for this proposal that was approved today is possible from the Connecting Europe facility. And for these projects, support is possible at 50% of the eligible costs. Now, the last program I want to mention is LIFE. Again, it has a multi-pillar structure. It's focused on environment and climate action. For companies, LIFE is known to support close-to-market technologies, meaning demonstrations and pilots of new technologies, bringing them from late research stage to market stage. The general funding rate is 55% in general. It takes the form of grants, of course. And just to give you an example of a project that could be supported under LIFE, let's take the example of a chemicals company that wants to develop a closed loop system for chemical production that would reduce the waste it generates and recycles materials more efficiently. So this is a type of program that LIFE could successfully support and accelerate the deployment and the discovery of the technologies involved. So this was the EU level. We can now go to the national level, because I mentioned in the beginning that EU funding is governed at national, it can also be governed at national or regional level. And this is done to reflect the different priorities each region or each country has. The slide focuses on the core programs available in country to support green investments. But before I go into each program, I'd like to mention that anticipating the amount of funding that can be obtained from this instrument is much more challenging, because different conditions apply to different calls for proposals, even within the same country. So what I will do is highlight the different options that are available. But if you need further support to identify exactly how much support you can get from each one, then we need to take that separately. Let me focus first on the cohesion funds, or the European Structural and Investment Funds, because these are the usual EU funding instruments that countries have at their disposal. For these, at least 30% of these funds need to go towards climate action. And to access these funds, countries need to set up operational programs where they describe the type of projects they want to support over a period of 7 years. And the current programs cover the period from 2021 to 2027. So we're just at the beginning of the cycle. The type of project that can be supported from SIF is very, very large. It can go from research and innovation to mobility, to decarbonization of heavy industry, renewable energy, energy efficiency, decontamination of polluted industrial sites as well. So many subjects. The next instrument I will mention is the Recovery and Resilience Facility. This one, as I said before, it's a temporary, it's a short-term instrument that was created as a result of the pandemic. It's meant to facilitate deep reforms, but also investments into making the economy more sustainable. 37% of the funds go to green investments and reforms. What's interesting to know is that because of the REPowerEU initiatives announced last year, now countries have an add-on of 20 billion euro to spend specifically on green investments and reforms. Countries are now deciding what this money will be spent on. So it's good to be engaged in the discussion at country level. Maybe just to give you an example of what can be funded from the RRF, there are several countries that are supporting, for instance, battery manufacturing facilities or facilities that can support solar panel or wind turbine or heat pump production facilities. This is to ensure that Europe's strategic autonomy in clean tech is preserved and that the targets for renewable energy can actually be achieved with European supply. The next fund I will mention is the Modernization Fund. This one was established under the EU ETS directive. It pulls its budget from the EU ETS fund. It's meant to support 10 countries in the Central and Eastern Europe to invest in greenhouse gas emission reduction and energy efficiency and just the modernization of the energy system. Because the budget is based on the price of carbon, it means there has been a significant increase on the funds available. And that means more money can support more real projects. Unlike the other instruments, the Modernization Fund doesn't follow pre-approved national plans. It has a more flexible structure. Member states can use funds to support investments into priority sectors, as I mentioned, green hydrogen, electric vehicles, EU ETS, decarbonization, renewable energy, and it does so in a more flexible manner. They don't have to wait 7 years to propose new calls for proposals. They can change this every year, every 2 years as needed. And maybe just to give you an example of a project that was funded under the Modernization Fund that we worked on, we helped a large steel producer that was looking to finance the electrification of its furnaces. And the program at the time offered 15 million euro and a 50% funding rate. So that's the type of support that the Modernization Fund can offer. The last instrument is the Just Transition Fund, which is meant to target those areas and those regions that are most affected by the transition to a greener economy. So we're speaking about regions where heavy industry is predominant or where coal and mining operations are present. To access these funds from the Just Transition Fund, countries have to create a Just Transition Plan where they detail the type of support that they plan to offer. And the possibilities are renewable support or support for employees for upskilling and reskilling because of closure of mines. These regions are pre-identified and they're just starting to be implemented now. Now, if we go to the next slide, just wanted to highlight one message. So if we look at the main funding programs that we have available, either at EU level or at national level, and we've seen in the discussion today that EU's actions to support the decarbonization and the green transition, they're not new. They predate more recent developments, such as the Inflation Reduction Act. So the budgets have been there for quite some time, but it's not only about making large amounts of money available to businesses to become sustainable. To be successful, the rules of injecting this money into real projects and real investments need to be easy, needs to be flexibilized. And because we're speaking about putting public money into private sector, state aid legislation plays a central role. And under normal conditions, when setting the rules for awarding support to private projects, member states have to work within the limits of the General Block Exemption Regulation, which offers a simplified set of rules for approving projects. If a project wouldn't fall within the remit of GBER, then it would have to be approved on a case-by-case basis in connection with DG competition. About 90% of the aid that is awarded in the European Union follows the simplified rules of GBER. So it was essential for the Green Deal to be successful for the rules of GBER to be aligned to the priorities and the targets of the Green Deal. And this happened. We have an updated General Block Exemption Regulation. We also have updated guidelines for individual support. What changed is more types of aid can now be approved. They're better aligned with the types of real projects that we see in the economy. So we now have support for mobility that wasn't possible before. We have support for energy efficiency in buildings or for hydrogen and so on. But we also have higher aid limits possible. So for most of these investments that I just mentioned, aid is possible to up to 30 million euro under simplified rules. However, at the same time that the Commission was working on updating and flexibilizing the standard rules, we had multiple crises happening with COVID, with the energy crisis, with the IRA, and this kept adding pressure on the private sector. And the EU's response, as Mercedes has said earlier, was to come out with a temporary targeted flexibilization of state aid rules. And this was how we got to the temporary crisis and transition framework, which is meant to apply only during a very limited window of time and to flexibilize and increase the type of support possible for certain sectors such as clean tech or renewable energy. What's most important about this framework is that it's now possible in some of the less developed regions for member states to match the aid that is possible in other geographies if there's a risk of relocation. So protectionism at its finest, I would say. Now let's go to my last slide and then we can open up the discussion. I already see there are quite a number of questions. As Mercedes said, business as usual in the sense of not putting sustainability at the core of your business model will very soon no longer be possible if we judge by the amount of green legislation that keeps getting approved every month. And the transition will have to be made. But today there are funds and funding instruments that can help you make the transition. Now the temporary crisis framework applies only until December 2025. The Recovery and Resilience Facility must be spent by August 2026. So you can feel the urgency and the drive for action in this very short timeline. So that means we have a very limited window of time where there are lots of funds on the table and the rules of engagement are more flexible than ever before. And indeed, the process of accessing public funding in Europe is not always easy, but with a strong team behind you, and enough time to build a strong proposal, your chances of success increase. And I think with this, I will close my presentation and just start taking questions.
Thank you very much, Anka, for that very comprehensive overview of the funding available. Really appreciate you sharing that expertise with us. So to kick off the questions, actually, and I see there are quite a number in the Q&A, so thank you for that. Keep dropping them in. I want to kick off the questions actually with a question to you, Mercedes. So you showed us, the very wide scope of the EU Green Deal. So what is your advice to board members in the audience to know which regulation will affect their business and to what extent those impacts will be seen? What are really the key legislations that they need to know about today? And maybe as a second part to that question, if you could comment quickly on what does the future hold, actually? Are we going to see this rapid, increase in legislation for years in the future? What do you predict is coming next for EU in this area?
If I knew. Thank you. I'll try to make it a synthesis. I think the management in a company takes care about the compliance issue. And I think again and again is the nature of the issue and the complexity of the issue that we have related to our transition to net zero that the boards have to understand. we said it's no longer business as usual. You need, there is an urge to decarbonize. In the normal exercise of assessing risk, the risk is stranded assets. Things are moving fast, and the attitude of not facing it is not basically within the within the let's say the board's responsibility of duty of care of what is the future of the company. In the top legislation, I'm not going to say that the board needs to know about all. They need to know about what I just said. The nature of the changes requires another approach and another holistic type of reaction. They need to know about what is substantial with them. So the financial report have been usually the most important exercise and attracting a lot of attention for the boards. I think they need to go beyond that, because even the climate reporting will be as important as the financial when they will be looking for investors. But everything which is coming under the climate reporting is important for them. So not only CSDR, that they are certainly the CFO is taking care of, but everything that will come out of the due diligence directive in the future. Then the boards need to know that also operations and will be affected. So it depends on which sector they are, where kind of markets are they in the European market, are they relying on the supply chain in which carbon tax can apply, but also in their production lines, how much they need to invest, the developments on the right to repair and making circularity quite embedded in the product design. The design eco-labels and certification are also evolving to have more criteria on sustainability. So they don't need to know all the details, but they need to know that there is a lot of changes which are not affecting, they're affecting deeply the way their business is going. So I will put over there a very careful matrix of attention of what is coming out, and ask regularly their management about how they are prepared and how they are responding to that. And on the what more to come, I think EU will not stop here. We might have a context in which there is a macro financial tensions with inflation, we have the disruption of geopolitics, but we have seen the reactivity of the EU policy. I've browsed in some of the questions. We have a different nature that what is the US, and Anka is also saying about that, because we have different multiple instruments and centers of activation, let's say. But there is major reactivity of the EU policy, is reacting fast. Member states have not shown to be really on the leader side. So I think EU will step out again, probably out of its own boundaries. And I did mention early on that they are acknowledging that there is a structural need. So the European Sovereign Fund, which is not part of what we are discussing today, but is in the picture, will put us for more to come. And last, on the policy side as well, EU is also investigating about working on regulatory sandboxes, which is putting policy in the face of the reality to see how not only policy evidence-based is, but how is really impacting and making the necessary impact for them to move. So I think we're here for a ride.
More to come. Thanks, Mercedes. So maybe a question to you, Anke, because I think you gave some examples of very interesting funding opportunities for companies. I wanted to ask you a little bit into the realistic nature of a company, being successful in their application. So how competitive is the application process? What is your advice for businesses to increase their chance of success? And maybe in answering that question, you can talk a little bit about what are some of the key challenges that companies face when they're going through that application process.
Okay. Well, I'll start with the challenges first. We see that the company struggles the most with having enough time and the right people behind their project. The earlier you can start with building your proposal and just identifying a project, putting your thoughts on paper and start building around that, the better your chances of success. And also to build a successful project for some, we're speaking about large investment projects, not about a small, very limited green investment. We're speaking about something that is complex. The more expertise you can align behind your project, the greater your chances of success. And I'll give you an example for the Innovation Fund. To build a successful application, you have to bring information from across the organization. You need financial information, business information, technical information, but then also information on the legal side. For example, how will you protect your IP? What's the legal status of the land you're investing on, and so on. You need to be aware of these requirements and put all the people that have the answers to these questions together in time to build the proposal. That's one part of your question. Could you repeat the first part as well?
Yeah, what are sort of the chances of success? I mean, what is the competitive nature of actually applying for these fundings? I don't know if you have a view on how many applications get submitted and how many are actually successful at the end of the day.
Yeah, it varies very, very much depending on the instrument. The Innovation Fund is notoriously competitive. For example, there were hundreds of applications in the first round, only 7 for large-scale projects, only 7 made it out. For Horizon Europe, if we're speaking about a very niche technology, for instance, thin film technologies, there are not a lot of competitors in the market naturally. So the competition will be lower, and so will be the number of selected projects. Irrespective of the competition, work on a strong, mature project and your chances of success should be good.
Okay, thank you, Anka. Maybe a question for you both from the audience. So Anne Vian is asking, does the EU have any help set up for smaller companies to find their way in legislation, reporting, and maybe also, is there funding available for smaller companies as well?
Anka, just maybe you will complete certainly. The SMEs, for instance, are for the time being waive of certain obligations on the climate reporting because of the size, because of the difficulties. They are meant to come in the later stage, but they are a little bit out of the game. So, of course, in an ideal world, we'll tell them that they need to adapt to the changes that they are going to come in the future. But for them, it is really a struggle, and they have voiced that in many occasions with the European Commission. But I think if we want to create this level playing field, the SMEs, which are the industry, I mean, they are the base of the economy in most of our European countries, do need to play a role, because if you consolidate them together, they are a very critical economic actor. Anka, maybe to you on the financing of the support?
So, for the financing part, I can say that there are dedicated calls where only SMEs are eligible to apply. So there's a safe space for them to obtain funding. Many of the funding authorities do offer initial qualification of projects and support for you to start building your project. So there is that support available out there. But I'll just mention that the big industrial players also play a very important role, because you need to hit critical mass to make the change happen throughout the economy. So you need the two together. You need SMEs and the big projects as well.
Thanks. Maybe Anka, a follow-up question for you. So in order to be eligible for EU funding, are there any specific environmental or sustainability metrics that businesses must meet? And if so, how are these metrics evaluated and monitored? What type of minimum bar is there for entry into some of these funding applications?
Okay, I'll mention the example of renewable energy and an energy efficiency project. And for this, usually you have to present a before investment and after investment evaluation of your environmental footprint. So if we're speaking about renewable energy, how much energy you consume from the grid before you invest, and then after you invest and produce it with your own solar panels or wind turbines. This metrics and this evaluation is to be confirmed by an independent party. So indeed, it has to be proven that you did what you got the money for. For energy efficiency, the same, and greenhouse gas emissions as well. You need to calculate how much you produce before the investment and after. There are instruments such as the Innovation Fund, which tie the release of the money to attaining intermediate steps along the way. So some of the instruments are very well tied to the metrics, others are a little bit more flexible.
Thanks. So in the Q&A, we have a couple of comments, and Mercedes, you alluded to this earlier, from Pascal and Alain and others asking about some of the shortcomings of the EU Green Deal potentially, and some criticism that has been seen in the media this past weeks, and also just a general question, on how does it compare to the IRA or what's happening in the US. So I know we talked about this a few times. I don't know if there's any additional thoughts you want to share on that. I will just mention quickly as well that Chapter 0 Brussels is organizing a follow-up discussion to this one to deep dive with our counterparts in the US, so the American chapter, to dig in a little bit deeper onto this topic in the next weeks. And I'll share some information of that with you at the end of this webinar. Feel free to comment, Mercedes and Anka, on this big question.
Yeah, big question. I don't know if I have the right answers. I would just drop some elements which are maybe my personal perceptions, but indeed, the outcome of the Green Deal industrial plan has been criticized. It came too late, is too little, and does it really compare to the US? So you can go about a very rapid comparison. Is basically quite a lot of, the same volumes of money, 366 billion, I think, in the IRA, and a bit similar in the EU. But in the EU, you can also accumulate with all the big amounts that Anka has been putting on the table, which are structurally there, and they are there to continue. Another thing as well, Biden administration has been able to put this on the table with other elements, the CHIPS Act, the infrastructure one, etc., which are probably linked to the political mandate of Biden. What if tomorrow Biden or another candidate doesn't want to pursue that or anything else happen? It limits as well the duration and the availability of the funding. Anka also mentioned that EU funding might be also subject to a stop, but I think if we look at the developments coming out from the European Sovereign Fund, which is to give a predictability of the funding available, not depending only on the member states, we might go in a more structural type of response long-term by the EU, also accompanied by policy measures that they encourage not only the access to subsidies, but more structurally deep changes in the environment in which business operates. And yes, it's a carrot and sticks type of race. And last, because I don't think I'm the best place to fully develop, and as you said, we'll talk about that in the next event. What I was going to say, I forgot. Yes, the fact that I lost my mind in what I wanted to conclude regarding.
That's okay. Maybe
2 seconds. 2 seconds. It will come back.
We give you a minute to think about it. Anka, do you want to add in
yes.
some points in the meantime?
Yes. On the IRA versus Europe response. It's not a fully comparable situation. And also keep in mind that the US also doesn't have just one instrument to fund all the sectors. They also have a multitude and a complex funding landscape that you need to navigate. But just judging at how fast the EU came out with a response to the IRA and to every other crisis, it just shows that the EU is committed to solve the problems. It moves a lot faster than it used to. It's still figuring out some things, but things are moving in the right direction, in my opinion.
Yeah, I know what I wanted to say. When you read the NZA, so the Net Zero Industrial Act, you still are short of the means for the European Commission to get his ambition. The frame is there. The means to get there is still to be developed. Somebody didn't mention nuclear, for instance. So there is a lot of topics which are still creating problems. And NZA as being a sort of, again, a compromising solution with all the member states, as Anka said, is the beginning of a response, because we have this, or we haven't seen any member state really taking a very leadership role over there, or we have nothing. So indeed, I think the challenge will be to improve, to make it more walk the talk, and to be inspired not only by reaction, but by a more structural response on the long term to really go on this journey.
Okay, thank you both. So looking at a different type of question, actually, so shifting the focus a little bit, Martin is asking about the skills, which was the third pillar that you presented, Mercedes, of the EU Green Deal Industrial Plan. I don't wonder if you could talk a little bit about what actions are taken there. His question is around, does it also consider soft skills, leadership skills necessary to drive the transformation of business and help, to adapt to such a complex, fast-changing and disruptive environment? So what actions are the EU taking around skills?
Any net zero economy will need some skills, and we might not have those skills because of demography, because of the skills we have today are not adapted for tomorrow. So I think this is a beginning of an attempt to really look at how we can reskill, upskill capacities to create, I think they want to create net zero upskilling academies. So to be seen what is going to be on the debate, but I think it is part of the response, and it's part as well of the care of the European Commission to still try to foster growth with jobs. So the traditional economic look at jobs in the economy and how we nurture them and we create them is quite important. I don't know more into the details of what is it. I don't know, Anka, if you know more about this.
Yes, maybe just one short comment. It's recognized that skills are needed for net zero technologies to be brought to the market. But within that program, I think there are different levels of emergency. And I think the first priority is just hands-on installers that can put solar panels on the roof or work with other technologies. So I think that's the core focus, but it doesn't exclude the others. So we might see funding channeled first and foremost to the hands-on people working with the new technologies, but not excluding the other levels as well.
Great, thanks. So another question from the chat, maybe that's more for you, Anka, as well. Do we see any impact of the current banking crisis on the financing side? Is there any indication that that's going to alter the funding available?
Not yet. So today we spoke mostly about grants. I didn't touch the international financial institutions that are implementing some of the instruments. For instance, InvestEU is channeled through the EIB, but also a couple of other banks. I think it's too early in the game to know for sure. What I will tell you is that when a bank is approved as a partner in a EU program, it usually has to pass a few very thorough benchmarks for stability and resilience.
Yeah, I would say the same, that the financial regulation and the stress test on banks have tried to protect to a certain extent the renewal of the crisis in 2019. Let's see how things develop, but for the time being, we seem to be a little bit safe, if I can say very cautiously this kind of words.
And actually, I think you answered it, Anka, a bit in that question, but there's a follow-up question also from Veronique on, indeed, what is the types of funding? What are the formats actually within the program? Is it mostly grants or are there other instruments? But I think maybe you want to say a few additional words on that.
Yes,
sure it's clear.
I would say the share is 85% grants and the remaining are loans or other financial instruments. Yeah, indeed, I focused on the ones that would give the most support and the most popular type of supports that our clients are asking for, so grants.
Okay, thanks. So yes, we have a question here from Martin again. Although the energy transition is a priority, we know it is not sufficient to solve our environmental challenges. What do you think will come next at EU level? What are your views that the decarbonization of the industry, if not accompanied by other programs, will contribute to a, quote, system on steroids that will continue to damage the environment? Any thoughts on that one?
Well, I'm not a political savvy, but I would say that for the time being, the steps in which the European Commission has engaged are the right ones. We have been talking about the sustainable finance, how to get access to the funding. We have taken at the on the reporting side, so the investors find a certain reference to what the company is doing and how they are reporting and progressing on the journey. We are seeing the operational parts, so the existence of a carbon tax, the existence of possibilities for the companies to tap into to push their consumption and energy to other directions. So the different levels are being coping up. But at the same time, we are seeing areas in which the Commission was never present. So the environmental policy was always there, but it's just taking a dimension in which business need to take care about the impact on pollinators, find nature-based solutions, taking care about the impact on biodiversity, talking about human rights in the company. So these kind of very holistic type of dimension as being or is being spreading out the Commission. So maybe some will be a little bit afraid, but at the end of the day, we still need a level playing field in which everybody finds to be measured and to be able to work on the same directions to make the most of it. So I think the spread is there because at the end of the day, the carbon emissions are just making the planet livable or not livable. So it does have to affect everything. And now that we are all taking full stock of the impact of biodiversity in our existence and in the agriculture, etc., it has become a part of what the European Commission has been talking about. The soil legislation about the quality of our soils. It has to do with the biodiversity, with the impact on agriculture, with the water retention. So we are really in a very highly interconnected world, not only on the digital side, but we are one with the planet in which we live. And I think policy is reaching out to all these places as well.
Sounds quite complex. Obviously, climate change is a complex issue, but really a complex policy answer and a lot of interconnected things going on, actually. So it must be challenging to make sure everybody's pushing in the right direction and no sort of competing messages are being sent out to the public. I don't know, Anka, do you have any other additional points on that question that you'd like to add?
Yes, maybe from the funding side, I think the EU went for the sectors with the most impact first. So that's why we see more funding for EU ETS sectors, more funding for mobility or buildings, or also for energy, because we all feel the impact of high energy prices. So I think it's first high impact, and then it will trickle down to all the others.
Great, thanks. So again, looking at some of the technologies, there's a question here from Lieven about the significance of e-fuels. Is nuclear energy really seen as a clean technology, or is the status not yet clear? What's included in the policy response around e-fuels? And
e-fuels is a long debate which has been coming out recurrently, and I would say that in the whole package of policy initiatives coming out of Green Deal, this ban on the combustible cars or the injection combustible cars, ICE engines, and the fact that Germany has decided just, well, maybe in 2035, I'm not that ready, and what do I do with my powerful automotive industry? So they find a sort of way to maybe give a certain advantage to the automotive industry in which they don't need to transform that much the cars they are producing today to use EU fuels. But there being a lot of resistance, a lot of lobbying, and a lot of question mark how EU fuels are, well, they are not totally carbon neutral. They are less, but they are not. And this discussion has been totally, able to put out in the discussion of the ICE and the ban of the ICE engines, but it was exited and it came back again at the very last minute in a very extraordinary type of procedure. So we have never seen at this level of mature legislation having a member state coming and asking for negotiation with the Commission to make a change. So it's not a very good precedent. And again, the fuels are not totally scientifically proven to be the solution of the past, but is definitively a solution to maintain the production of certain cars as we know today, so they can use the EU fuel. So it's a compromising, and as you know, sometimes compromising is a very good virtue that the Belgians have developed, but maybe in this case, it creates more a precedent than the compromise. Anka?
No, really, you covered it, everything. From a youth funding perspective, if you are supported today, well, let's see what tomorrow will bring.
Okay, thanks. So there's another interesting question here on the funding side from Laurent, and then I think we will move into the last questions, which talk more about the board structure, KPIs, how to practically manage this topic within the boards. But first, a question from Laurent, and maybe Anka, it's something for you. In the case of these large public funding grants, there's also a risk of fraud, and he refers to an investigation on French TV that happened recently with agricultural funding. Which measures are in place to reduce these fraud risks?
Okay, so there are no new measures because of the Green Deal, but there are the measures that have always been in place for EU instruments. Every country, when dealing with EU funding, has to set up its anti-fraud office, and then there is a European centralized office that supervises all the in-country bodies. There are investigations into projects receiving EU funding, into organizations receiving EU funding all the time. The goal is to reduce the frauds and the irregularities as much as possible, but it does happen. The EU is going as far as completely blocking the funding for some of the countries when the suspicion is just too high. And we have the very high level example of Hungary, maybe Poland. So there are instruments in place to make sure that fraud is prevented, but they're not specific to the Green Deal.
Okay. So the last there's three questions here from Rakesh and two from Hans, and they're very much linked to, how should boards embed this knowledge in their structure, maybe specifically looking at the regulatory side. Should it be a dedicated expert, or should they set up a committee? What's the best practice in terms of boards staying on top of these issues and being knowledgeable? And a sort of a related question as well from Rakesh around defining KPIs and metrics around these updated regulations for compliance, but also to keep track and being able to access favorable investments and funding. And he also thanks you both for your wisdom and experience on the topic.
I think boards do need to track what's happening on this front because it's material to their business and is basically embedded in the role that they are playing. So I think they cannot ignore. So they need to make sure that somebody in the management covers it up, that in the agenda of their meetings, there is a reporting, a monitoring, an assessment, if needed, of these issues. In the new developments of one part of the director duties of one of the directive on due diligence, the Commission will make it, or will attempt, because we are in the process of discussing this famous directive, of putting a responsibility for boards. So they need to know, because they will be responsible as well for the knowledge or for ignoring what's happening over there. They need also to be prepared and being able to understand. If I put into perspective the latest green claims directive, which is basically those companies who are claiming that they have a net neutral or carbon neutral type of product, they can be sued because they are not they are selling a product that is not really proven to be a net carbon and can be fined because of these actions. So they also need to have the critical sense to be able to assess that their own company is not just doing elements of greenwashing in different varieties that you can do it, and that it is measurable, it is tangible, it is reported. And I think in that sense, the climate reporting will also help just to put this into a certain frame. So for boards, they need to be aware, they need to ask questions, they need to be fed by the management about what is happening, certainly some KPIs, and individually, the duty of care of the board will encompass the responsibility in regard to this topic. Is probably the major risk for business today. It needs to be whatever it takes for the board just to be aware and guide their business in the right direction.
Anka, would you like to share some thoughts on that as well? And maybe this question around if there's specific KPIs or metrics, for compliance purposes, but also for, to be able to access favorable investments and funding. Do you have any advice on how a company could get started if they want to start thinking about this?
I can share what we see happening with most of our clients. So companies invest a lot. They're not always aware of their full investment portfolio at board level. I think building first capacity internally in understanding what EU funds can support and is a first step, definitely. Then maybe prioritizing those projects that could obtain EU funding is a good best practice. So building an internal EU fundable project discovery process would be a natural place to start, I would say.
Yeah.
Great, thanks. Maybe you can continue, Anka. There's also a question here from Daniel asking very practically if a company, works with a company like yours, Schumann Associates, to have support with this type of financing. How does it work actually? What are the elements? What type of resources are required from the company? How does the model set up? Anything that you can share there?
Okay, I can share how we work. So we always start with the first discussion because we need to understand what sectors you're interested in, how wide do you want to go? Do you want to analyze 5 EU countries, 7 EU, all EU countries? So that would answer the question on how much time do we need to come up with a funding map. And then we'll continue building together. You will not go for all the EU funding opportunities out there. I don't think that we ever had a client who went for the full list of possibilities, but as many as possible and finding the right mix of funding instruments for you. It's a continuous discussion, definitely.
And does it require a lot of resources from the company side as well? Do they generally have a team of people looking at it from their side, or 1 or 2 experts?
Yeah, it depends on the stage. If you're at the stage where you just want to identify what sources are available for you, then no, you don't need a lot of effort. But if you want to submit a project, then yes, you would need a team behind you. I would say there's a window of 1 to 3 months for the more complex instruments where the team really needs to work hands-on the project. But yeah, you need to allocate the resources if you want the reward.
Yeah, definitely. Actually, there was a follow-up question there as well. And, the general time frame from start to finish, how long does it generally take from, let's say, conception, a company has the idea, they want to apply for the funding until actually getting the money?
Yeah.
What does it look
Again,
like?
there is no one answer to fit all situation. It can be very fast. For instance, I'll give you the example of EV charging station in Netherlands. You get the answer in less than a month, but that's a simple application. For the steel factory that we mentioned before, the process is now taking more than a year. So it depends on complexity, on how experienced the funding authority is. So many factors come into play.
Okay, so ranging from a quick answer in a month to up to a year, a year-long process, which actually takes me to another question for you both, actually. So you've both talked about how things are speeding up at EU level, but despite these changes, that things in the recent past happening relatively quickly, it still takes quite some time to trickle down into laws transposed at member state level. Yeah. At the same time, anyone who's a little bit, aware and engaged in the climate crisis, which I think many of our audience members are, the one message that we keep getting is that we don't have time, right? We need to act now, we need to act today. We are late, we are maybe a decade behind, if not more. So what's your advice how to, merge these two things happening at the same time? What's your advice in terms of how do we navigate this still relatively slow process, even though it might be speeding up somehow?
Maybe Anka, if you allow me, I start. I think it's a surprise, definitively for me, that I've been so close to see business and how they can be reactive as much as your market share plunges or reduce or any other risk. I still am surprised to see the reactivity being a little bit low, a little bit not put in the right level. And I have no answer for that. I think I keep on saying during the presentation that the nature of the change is fundamentally out of the kind of business scope that he blurs a little bit the appreciation of how deep and how transformative the crisis is. So I don't know. There is some maybe resistance to see it like this. maybe we are all a product of our business education, executive education, in which the KPIs were always basically the same. So this question of KPIs is a reference that we still believe on KPIs, but we don't have necessarily the right KPIs, and those KPIs need fundamentally to be different. And maybe also the fact that we don't want to see these changes coming because we don't know how to handle, and the normal tools we have at hand were not working anymore. When I talk to boards, one of the questions that comes often is, my competitor, my direct competitor is not moving. Why I need to move on a very deep and complicated and costly ESG strategy? Well, I keep on repeating things that Anka and you were saying. I think education and education of boards and exercise like the Director Climate Journey that we are doing in Chapter 0 do help boards to really understand the depth, the breadth, the transformative nature of what is happening, and that there is no one solution immediate to fix it that is basically changing the whole business. So I do understand in that way, when you put in that perspective, that to change your business, you might be a little bit reluctant because you go in a field in which you feel a bit less competent and least at ease because you are not that prepared. So get prepared, get educated, and get to understand what is going on, and make sure that the management also gets this understanding, because it's a game in which everybody has his responsibilities. And if you also want to attract talent for tomorrow, those young talents are probably getting into the skin what is the challenge of today. And for them, this value dimension of taking care of the nature and the planet is becoming increasingly important. And tomorrow business cannot do it without talent and without people.
Anka, would you like to add some thoughts?
Yes, well, I think the emergency felt in the messages around climate change and the results we're not getting actually played a critical role in mobilizing this huge machinery that needs to move from EU institutions to, I don't know, public organizations to corporate organization, everyone basically in the economy. So the emergency of the messages sent out there helped mobilize everyone. I think there is still more needed to get to the right point, but I think things are moving, and the alternative is not move at all and not obtain even the little progress that we do have. So I think we still have to keep underlying the message that we need to move. There are instruments to help. Let's start doing the work that needs to be done.
Yeah, so a clear message, act now and not to wait necessarily. So just to close actually, and indeed we will share these slides with you. I just wanted to let you know we had a lot of questions around the US approach and European approach and the IRA. I mentioned this, but you can find it on our website. We will be scheduling another upcoming webinar actually already on the 11th of April, together with the NACD, which is the American Institute of Directors, and ICF, specifically looking at this question. So what are some of the differences and similarities and corporate climate finance between the two countries, or two regions rather. So looking forward to that discussion. And otherwise, I just want to say a big thank you to both Anka and Mercedes for their insights today, and also to the audience for sharing all of the questions and thoughts. It was a great overview. We will put this recording up on our Knowledge Hub on the website and also share the slides with you all. So thanks everybody. Thanks, Anka.
Thank you all. Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you all for attending. Thank you, Anka.
Have a nice day. Bye.
Bye.